imprint under his ring.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me. The security and the safety that they need. And we're a very open family, so we talk about, things that bother us and things that trouble us.
William and Catherine had reportedly reached the point where one decision could no longer be postponed. Camilla was being shut out of Windsor. Not publicly. Not with a royal announcement. Not with Charles standing beside her to explain what had happened. The restriction was happening quietly, through invitations, meetings, access and schedules. And according to the palace whispers surrounding the affair, the order came after one luxury yacht trip exposed a chain of questions that William could no longer ignore. The yacht was supposed to be a private escape. Instead, it became the beginning of a palace crisis. What made the situation explosive was not simply that Camilla had spent time aboard an expensive vessel. The real problem was allegedly who owned it, who was around her, what connections existed behind the scenes, and why information about the trip had apparently been handled so carefully. And when William's team began tracing those connections, they reportedly discovered that the yacht story reached further into the royal household than anyone initially expected. There was another detail that made the situation even more uncomfortable. William allegedly knew about the yacht before the story became a major public controversy. Someone had reportedly taken the information directly to him. That meant William was not scrambling to respond to a newspaper headline. He had been warned. And whoever delivered that warning apparently believed the future king needed to know what was happening before the rest of Britain did. So the question became brutally simple.
I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. Worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit. But in terms of, doing the job and things like that, I don't feel too overwhelmed by that. Not now.
What had happened aboard that yacht that someone felt William needed to know about? And if you want the truth about why this story allegedly reached the gates of Windsor, stay with it, because the yacht itself was only the first piece of evidence. The detail that came next reportedly changed William's entire understanding of what had happened. HI viewers, if you are glad William and Catherine finally drew a line with Camilla, then don't watch this in silence. Hit like if you stand behind the decision, share it with someone who would want to know what is happening inside Windsor, and subscribe because staying silent is exactly how stories like this disappear. If you believe the public deserves to know what happens next, make your position clear before we continue. The alleged yacht episode had already begun creating discomfort before most people outside the palace knew there was anything to discuss. There was no screaming match, no public accusation, and no official statement declaring Camilla responsible for wrongdoing. In this fictionalized account, the first warning was much smaller. A piece of routine information connected to a private vessel raised a question that should have been easy to answer. It wasn't. That was the first crack. A vessel associated with an exclusive Mediterranean trip appeared in records that could be examined independently of royal schedules. The kind of information that normally sits quietly in a database suddenly mattered because someone began comparing dates, locations, and photographs. One detail led to another. A private image reportedly showed people aboard the yacht. A location appeared to correspond with the timing of Camilla's movements. Then came the question that changed the atmosphere around the entire affair. Who had arranged it? The significance was not that a senior royal had enjoyed an expensive yacht. Wealthy people travel that way every summer. The problem, within this fictionalized narrative, was the company surrounding the trip and the possibility that some of those relationships carried interests close to royal institutions, charitable networks, property, or influence. That distinction is critical. The story was never supposed to be about luxury alone. It was about access. William had spent years watching his family learn the cost of blurred boundaries. Public life had taught him that a harmless dinner could become a photograph could become a relationship, and a relationship could become a question about influence. Once that question reached the press, explanations rarely sounded as clean as they had inside a private room. So when the yacht information reached him, William allegedly did not begin by asking how embarrassing it would look. He wanted to know who knew. That question was far more dangerous, because someone had apparently known about the trip before the information reached the wider public. Someone had understood enough about the circumstances to bring it to William's attention. Whether that person was a staff member, a guest, an intermediary, or simply someone alarmed by what they had witnessed remained uncertain. But the existence of an internal warning changed the shape of the story.
I always thought to myself, what's the point in bringing up the past? What's the point in bringing up something that's only going to make you sad? It ain't going to change it. It ain't going to bring her back. And when you start thinking like that, it can be really damaging. And you always said to me, you've got to sit down and think about those memories. But for me, it was like, don't want to think about it. Yeah.
William was no longer reacting to gossip. He was examining a warning. And warnings create a different kind of fear inside a palace. They force people to look backward. They force them to ask whether the thing that has just been discovered had actually happened before. That was when the yacht stopped being the whole story. The first trail reportedly led toward the arrangement surrounding the vessel, then toward the people connected to it, then toward previous contact. Each answer created another question. The deeper the alleged review went, the less convincing the idea of a simple private holiday became. There was also the matter of disclosure. Senior royals live inside an unusual world where hospitality can be personal while still carrying institutional consequences. A private invitation may look innocent to the person receiving it. But when the host has interests connected to businesses, charities, property, lobbying, or people seeking influence, the appearance alone can become dangerous. William understood that distinction. Camilla's position made it even more sensitive. She was not an ordinary guest on an ordinary holiday. She was the queen consort, a senior figure beside the king, with relationships across cultural, charitable, literary, and social circles. Any outside connection involving people with financial or political interests could be examined through a different lens simply because of who she was. And that was precisely where the alleged conflict began to tighten. A private trip could be defended. A private trip involving people with relevant outside interests could be questioned. A private trip involving those people after earlier contact had already been flagged would become something else entirely. It would become a pattern. William allegedly began asking for records. Not rumors. Not palace gossip. Records. Who arranged the trip? Who knew about it? How had the expenses been handled? Had the hospitality been declared through the appropriate internal channels? Had anyone previously raised concerns about the same circle? Had Camilla's household been warned? Had the king been informed? Every question narrowed the room for an easy explanation. Then came the detail that allegedly changed William's mood completely. The same network surrounding the yacht was not entirely unfamiliar to palace circles. There had been earlier contact. And somewhere in the institution, according to the fictionalized narrative, someone had already seen enough to worry. But that warning had not reached William. That omission was more troubling than the yacht itself. Because if a warning had existed and disappeared inside the machinery of the royal household, the problem was no longer simply Camilla's judgment. It was the system around her. William had spent years trying to build a monarchy where important decisions were documented, responsibilities were clear, and personal relationships did not quietly override institutional safeguards. He understood that one careless exception could destroy the credibility of an entire rulebook. Catherine understood the public side of that danger. The future king could not demand tighter standards from everyone else while allowing a senior member of the family to operate beyond them. The future queen could not build a reputation around duty, discipline, and public service while the institution appeared to tolerate unexplained private arrangements behind closed doors. The alleged yacht episode therefore created an uncomfortable choice. Protect Camilla from the story, or protect the institution from what the story might reveal. And according to the narrative being developed here, William and Catherine chose the second. That decision did not immediately produce a public punishment. It produced something much quieter. Questions about Windsor. Windsor had always carried a different meaning from a public engagement in London or a formal appearance beside the king. It represented private family space, confidential meetings, personal access, and the inner circle around the future monarchy. If someone's access to that environment changed, the change could be felt long before anyone announced it. That is exactly what allegedly began happening. A meeting changed location. An invitation failed to arrive. A private gathering was rearranged. A briefing was redirected. A schedule that once seemed fixed suddenly became flexible. None of those things alone proved anything. Together, they created a pattern. Camilla could still appear publicly. She could still stand beside Charles. She could still carry the title and perform royal duties. Nothing about the public image had yet collapsed. But behind that image, the architecture of access was beginning to shift. And William was not finished examining the evidence. Because the most important document had not yet been discussed. The document that could explain why the yacht had become a palace crisis. The document that could reveal whether this was really about one trip or whether the trip had merely exposed something that had been quietly troubling the royal household for much longer. And once William allegedly saw what was inside it, the question was no longer whether Camilla had made a questionable decision on a luxury yacht. The question became much more personal. Who had been protecting her from scrutiny? And why? The paperwork sitting in a locked office at Kensington Palace did not look like a scandal. It looked like invoices, maritime registry entries, and travel itineraries printed on heavy white paper. But when William placed his hand over the top sheet, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The initial Mediterranean yacht trip was no longer just an embarrassing summer holiday involving private jets and sun-drenched decks. It was a single node in a network that stretched much further back into the shadows of the royal household. The physical file detailed the ownership structure of the vessel itself, a multi-million-dollar superyacht registered under a complex web of offshore holding companies. The public narrative had suggested Camilla was simply enjoying a private retreat hosted by wealthy, well-meaning social acquaintances. But as investigators traced the beneficial ownership through layers of corporate filings, a very different picture began to take shape. The man listed at the end of the corporate chain was a powerful international financier with deep commercial ties to property portfolios, heritage development, and high-level lobbying initiatives touching several areas of public policy. There was no legal accusation against the owner. He was a legitimate businessman who enjoyed access to high society. But in the world of modern constitutional monarchy, legal guilt is rarely the bar that determines institutional survival. The bar is perception, proximity, and the unspoken trading of influence. William's reaction to these documents was not an explosive outburst of rage. It was a cold, systematic, and administrative detachment. Where others saw private gossip, he saw institutional vulnerability. He had watched previous generations of the family fall into the trap of accepting lavish hospitality from individuals who eventually used those connections to validate their own commercial standing.
No, but and some families sadly aren't as lucky as you guys have been, and being able to share things.
But we have been brought closer because of the circumstances as well. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You are, uniquely bonded because of what we've been through.
Yeah.
But even Harry and I, over the years, have not talked enough about our mother. We've
never enough.
Has doing this campaign sort of made you realise that?
Yeah, I think so.
In his mind, every unmonitored gift, every undocumented private flight, and every unvetted luxury stay was a ticking clock. He demanded a complete timeline. Not just of the recent Mediterranean voyage, but of every single interaction between Camilla's personal circle and the entities connected to the vessel's owner. What surfaced next transformed a simple headache into an existential problem. The records revealed that this recent yacht excursion was not an isolated event. Months before the vessel sailed across the Mediterranean, hospitality connected to the exact same corporate network had quietly changed hands. There had been private transfers, hosted stays at exclusive country estates, and quiet arrangements that had never passed through the official royal gift registers. It was a clear pattern of undisclosed hospitality spanning over a year. Catherine studied the documents alongside William, approaching the crisis through a sharp, strategic lens. She understood that a single headline about a yacht trip could be brushed off as tabloid intrusion. but a documented pattern of hidden hospitality involving individuals with commercial interests seeking palace proximity was a narrative that could dismantle years of careful public trust. If the story broke, the public would not see a harmless holiday. They would see a system where senior royals operated above the rules of transparency enforced on everyone else. Her concern was grounded in long-term preservation. A scandal of this nature would not only tarnish the current reign, it would cast a long, toxic shadow over the future monarchy she and William were building. She recognized that allowing one senior royal to bypass institutional protocol set a precedent that undermined the entire moral authority of the household. As the review deepened, the investigation uncovered something far more sinister than careless social oversight. Deep within the correspondence logs, researchers discovered an internal warning flag raised nearly 8 months earlier by a junior administrator responsible for monitoring potential conflicts of interest. The warning had specifically highlighted the risks associated with the yacht's financial network, urging that a formal briefing be provided to the senior household leadership before any further commitments were made. Yet, that warning had vanished into the bureaucratic machinery. It had never reached William. It had never reached Catherine. It had been systematically buried before it could trigger an official inquiry. Someone inside the palace infrastructure had deliberately intercepted the caution, ensuring that the luxury trips continued without internal scrutiny. The immediate question was no longer what Camilla had done on the water. The question was who had built a wall of protection around her activities, why they had chosen to hide the financial connections from the future king, and how deep that hidden loyalty ran inside the walls of the palace. Before we uncover who buried that critical warning, ask yourself this simple question. If you knew that a lie was slowly destroying the people you claim to love, would you have the courage to expose it, or would you stay silent to protect your own comfort? If you believe that truth must always come before convenience, hit that subscribe button right now. Do not walk away from this story and pretend that turning a blind eye is acceptable, because the next revelation proves just how far some people will go to protect a lie. The paper trail began to read like a map of deliberate deception. Each document raised questions about who was managing the flow of information inside the royal household. The invoices for secondary transport, private chauffeur services, and security logistics surrounding the yacht trips did not clear through the standard accounts department. Instead, they had been funneled through third-party intermediaries, effectively masking the true origin of the funding. William's team mapped the network, connecting the names of minor advisors to external public relations consultants who specialized in crisis control and reputation management. These were people whose loyalty was not pledged to the crown as an institution, but to specific individuals within the family. It became apparent that a parallel operation had been running in the background, designed to facilitate private luxuries while keeping the administrative oversight mechanisms completely in the dark. For Catherine, this was the ultimate betrayal of institutional trust. She argued that the integrity of the monarchy depended on an absolute commitment to transparency, especially from those at the very top. Allowing a private circle to operate with immunity created a dual standard that could easily destroy public confidence if exposed. She was not driven by personal animosity, but by an acute awareness of how fragile public consent truly is in the modern era. William called for a formal audit of all hospitality logs, expanding the scope beyond the yacht to include every major private function hosted by the same network over the past 2 years. The findings were staggering. Repeated meetings, private dinners, and behind-the-scenes interactions had taken place without being logged in the official court circular. The situation was escalating from a public relations worry into a full-scale governance crisis. Every clue suggested that the Mediterranean voyage was merely the visible tip of an iceberg, masking a deliberate effort to keep William and Catherine isolated from the truth. The silence within the palace grew heavier as the audit drew to a close. Advisors moved through the corridors with hushed voices, aware that the tension between Kensington Palace and the king's household was reaching an unsustainable peak. The physical file was now thick with evidence, containing bank routing slips, flight logs, and suppressed emails that exposed a continuous chain of undisclosed favors. Camilla maintained that her actions were entirely innocent, framing the hospitality as normal social interactions among long-standing friends. She resisted the idea that her personal relationships should be subjected to the cold mechanics of institutional oversight, questioning why a private vacation was being dissected as if it were a matter of national security. But the documentation told a story that emotion could not erase. The contrast between the official statements being prepared for the media and the cold realities buried in the financial records was too stark to ignore. William knew that his next move would redefine his relationship with his father, his stepmother, and the governance of the royal family itself. The period of quiet observations and internal checks was over. The evidence was clear, the paper trail was verified, and the suppressed warnings proved that the conflict was no longer about a single luxury yacht. The true problem was the deliberate attempts to hide the truth from those who would inherit the throne. As William prepared to present the file to the king, he knew that the ultimate question remained unanswered. Who had ordered the suppression of the original warning, and what were they expecting to gain in return? The answer to that question...
For me, the most important thing in my life is family, and everything is about the future. And about, if you don't start the children off now with a happy, healthy, stable home, I feel you're setting them up for a bit of a hard time and a fall.
The heavy oak doors of the drawing room at Kensington Palace slammed shut, cutting off the hum of the surrounding corridors. William stood at the head of a polished mahogany table, his face pale and unreadable as he dropped a thick leather binder onto the wood with a heavy thud. Across from him sat senior representatives from the king's personal household, their faces drawn, their eyes fixed on the black folder that contained months of suppressed records, financial routing slips, and flight manifestos. Catherine sat silently at William's right, her posture rigid, her presence projecting a cold, unwavering resolve. There was no greeting, no offer of tea, and no diplomatic pleasantries. William did not sit down. He leaned over the table, placed both hands on the leather cover, and delivered a single question that echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Who knew about this, and why was it kept from me? The atmosphere inside the meeting room deteriorated instantly into a tense, psychological standoff. The advisors sitting opposite the future king were seasoned palace administrators, men and women who had spent decades navigating public relations panics and royal scandals. But the material sitting before them was not a press inquiry or a tabloid leak. It was an internal audit detailing an elaborate network of hidden hospitality, unrecorded meetings, and private financial arrangements surrounding Camilla's Mediterranean voyage. William systematically flipped open the file, exposing line by line the hidden connections that had been compiled over weeks of discreet investigation. He pointed to specific dates, matching private flight logs with corporate entities tied to the superyacht owner. He highlighted the suppressed warning memo that had been intercepted 8 months earlier, demonstrating that the potential fallout had been recognized and deliberately hidden from his office. Catherine stepped into the silence, her tone sharp and precise. She made it clear that this was no longer a debate about private holidays or social circles. It was a failure of institutional governance. She reminded the representatives in the room that every time a senior royal accepts unvetted luxury from private individuals with commercial interests, the entire credibility of the crown is put at risk. If the public discovered that rules enforced on junior staff were being ignored at the highest levels, the damage to the future reign would be permanent. Her intervention reframed the entire conflict, transforming a personal dispute into a defense of the monarchy's future integrity. Charles saw his son's uncompromising stance as a cold, clinical attack on his personal household. The room became an arena of quiet heartbreak, where the bond of family clashed directly with the uncompromising demands of the state. Look at how easily people in power turn their backs on the truth when it threatens their comfortable lives. If you are sitting there right now, watching this unfold and choosing to ignore the obvious corruption, then you are part of the problem. If you actually care about integrity, accountability, and the courage to stand up against systemic deceit, hit that subscribe button right now. Leaving this channel without subscribing means you are turning a blind eye to the truth, and deep down, you know that makes you complicit. It was during this high-stakes standoff that the second major plot twist shattered whatever hope remained for a peaceful resolution. As Charles reviewed the timeline with his personal private secretary, a devastating fact came to light. The king himself had never been given the full story. He had been aware that Camilla was taking a private trip, but his own staff had withheld the critical details regarding the yacht owner's commercial interests, the previous undisclosed hospitality, and the suppressed internal warning. Charles had been kept in the dark by the very people hired to protect him. Someone within Camilla's immediate operational circle had actively managed the flow of information, ensuring that neither the King nor the Prince of Wales knew the true scope of the arrangements. The realization hit Charles with physical weight. The issue was no longer just a media risk or a disagreement between households. It was a direct, internal breach of authority within his own living quarters. Catherine seized upon this revelation, demonstrating her sharp strategic importance to the future of the monarchy. She pointed out that if those surrounding Camilla felt comfortable with holding vital information from the reigning king, then the current administrative structure was fundamentally broken. She argued that allowing these hidden channels to exist without consequences created an unacceptable vulnerability for the entire institution. Her calm, analytical approach stripped away emotional deflections, forcing the king to face the harsh reality of the situation. The confrontation ended without raised voices, but the line had been drawn. Charles sat in silence, realizing that he could no longer shield Camilla's household from the sweeping administrative changes William and Catherine were demanding. The private center of power had shifted. The decision regarding Camilla's future access to the heart of the monarchy was no longer a matter of opinion. It had become an inevitable, chilling reality that would begin at the gates of Windsor. The internal calendar at Windsor Castle was updated on a rainy Tuesday morning without a single press release or public statement. A senior household administrator opened the master scheduling software, clicked on a series of high-level private engagements, and systematically deleted one name from the access manifests. There was no public declaration, no formal statement issued to the press, and no dramatic television broadcast. Instead, with a few quiet strokes on a keyboard, Camilla's physical presence was erased from the private heart of the royal estate. The mechanics of this power shift were executed with cold, bureaucratic precision. William and Catherine had decided that a noisy public confrontation would only damage the monarchy they were trying to safeguard. The solution was not a public trial, but a systematic administrative dismantling. Invitations to exclusive private gatherings within Windsor Castle simply stopped arriving at Camilla's office. Private meetings that had historically taken place in the drawing rooms of the estate were quietly relocated to satellite offices in London or rescheduled to times when she was known to be elsewhere. The flow of intelligence, daily security briefings, and preliminary event itineraries sent to her staff began to dwindle, reduced to surface-level summaries that contained no strategic insight. Engagements that had long been part of her routine domain were reassigned. Catherine stepped forward, quietly accepting responsibility for high-profile patronages, ceremonial events, and private estate meetings that had previously fallen within Camilla's sphere of influence. The transition was so seamless, so polished, that to the outside observer, it appeared to be nothing more than a natural evolution of royal duties. When Camilla's chief of staff attempted to lodge a formal query regarding the missing invitations and altered schedules, the response from William's office was brief, neutral, and terrifyingly absolute. The administrative changes were attributed entirely to operational considerations. That single phrase became a recurring barrier against every attempt to challenge the new reality. Operational considerations meant there was no court of appeal, no emotional negotiation, and no room for personal influence. To understand the weight of this quiet removal, one must understand what Windsor represents within the architecture of the British monarchy. Windsor is not merely a residence or a historical monument. It is the private sanctuary of the sovereign, the inner sanctum where trust is non-negotiable and family proximity translates directly into political power. Being excluded from Windsor is not a minor inconvenience. It is an institutional exile, a clear signal that an individual has been stripped of their position within the inner circle of authority. Camilla soon began to realize that the ground beneath her feet had shifted permanently. The subtle signs were everywhere. Gate pass records at the private entrances were updated, requiring her personal security detail to request advance clearance through channels managed directly by William's team. Staff members who had worked alongside her for years found themselves reassigned to external departments or excluded from high-level planning sessions. The isolation was deliberate and psychological. Every time a major event took place at Windsor without her presence, the message was reinforced without a single word being spoken in anger. Catherine's role in this transition was pivotal. She did not act out of personal malice or petty court rivalry. She moved with the cool, calculating instinct of a future queen who understood that the survival of the institution depended on enforcing strict boundaries. By stepping into the spaces Camilla was forced to vacate, Catherine ensured there was no vacuum of leadership, no visible sign of institutional weakness for the media to exploit. The public saw a unified, confident future king and queen carrying out their duties at Windsor with effortless grace. Behind the walls, however, the silence surrounding Camilla's absence grew louder with every passing week. It was during the third month of these quiet restrictions that the deepest plot twist of the entire conflict became undeniably clear. The permanent block placed on Camilla's access to Windsor was never really about the luxury yacht. The yacht, with its complex corporate ownership and hidden paper trail, was merely the spark that ignited the investigation. The real cause of the exile was a fundamental collapse of trust. William and Catherine had concluded that the individuals surrounding Camilla had built a parallel structure of influence, one that deliberately withheld information, bypassed institutional oversight, and compromised the security of the crown's future. The Mediterranean trip had simply exposed a far more dangerous reality, revealing that those close to the stepmother could not be trusted with proximity to the throne. Camilla reportedly demanded a private audience with William to address the vanishing access and the systematic dismantling of her household's authority. She pointed out that her public standing was being subtly undermined and that the ongoing restrictions were becoming impossible to conceal from attentive court observers. William listened to her demands with cold, unyielding composure. He did not offer emotional debate or engage in historical grievances. He simply stated that the security, integrity, and future governance of Windsor Castle required absolute compliance with modern standards of transparency. The message was clear. The era of informal arrangements, unvetted hospitality, and suppressed warnings was over. Ask yourself how many times you have allowed a comfortable lie to replace an uncomfortable truth just to keep the peace in your own life. If you are sitting there right now, watching a system of deception crumble, yet you refuse to take a stand, what does that say about your own principles? If you believe that accountability should apply to everyone, regardless of their title or wealth, hit the subscribe button right now. Leaving this page without subscribing proves that you would rather look away than face the hard reality of truth. The administrative machinery at Windsor continued to tighten its grip. A major private gathering, traditionally hosted by senior members of the family to celebrate long-standing household staff, was planned, organized, and executed entirely without Camilla's participation. William and Catherine appeared side by side at the head of the hall, projecting an image of total stability and absolute command. When senior aides quietly inquired why the king's wife had not been included on the official seating plan, the response was once again delivered in that cold, immovable terminology. Operational considerations had dictated the guest list. Camilla's staff was left powerless. They could not go to the media without sparking a catastrophic constitutional scandal that would destroy what remained of their own standing. They could not appeal to Charles, because the king had already been shown the paper trail, the suppressed warnings, and the unrecorded meetings that proved his own household had been kept in the dark. The king was trapped between his personal devotion to his wife and his ultimate duty to the crown, forced to accept that his son had taken control of the institutional boundaries surrounding Windsor. As the weeks turned into months, the realization dawned on Camilla that this was not a temporary period of punishment. There would be no eventual return to the previous dynamic, no quiet restoration of private privileges. The doors of Windsor had closed, locked from the inside by a future king and queen who had decided that institutional survival was worth more than family harmony. Yet, despite the finality of the quiet removal, the ultimate revelation had not yet been delivered. As Camilla looked out from her remaining offices, aware that her position had been fundamentally altered, one critical detail remained hidden in the shadows. There was still one final document sitting in William's private desk, a confidential record that would ensure the block placed on her access remained absolute for the rest of her life. The confidential briefing paper lay open on the long mahogany desk inside Kensington Palace, its red security seal neatly sliced down the side. William did not flip through the pages. He did not need to. The key passages had already been highlighted in yellow ink, outlining a series of permanent operational changes to royal security protocols and estate access controls. This was not a temporary administrative note or a draft subject to review. It was the formal document that rendered Camilla's exclusion from the private grounds of Windsor absolute and indefinite. Every section of the report dismantled the idea that this conflict was a simple family feud over a summer holiday. The document mapped out a comprehensive assessment of internal security risks, specifically addressing how private financial relationships and unvetted third-party intermediaries could compromise the integrity of the sovereign's household. It laid out a strict, binding protocol governing who could enter private royal residencies, attend unrecorded strategy sessions, or access sensitive forward itineraries. The report explicitly noted that individuals who had engaged in unlogged hospitality or maintained undisclosed commercial contacts would be permanently restricted from non-public areas of Windsor Castle. Camilla's name appeared in the confidential appendix, cited not as a criminal, but as an unmanageable risk to institutional security and information governance. The narrative surrounding the luxury yacht had finally collapsed into something much larger and far more unsettling. What began as a rumor about a Mediterranean cruise had exposed a quiet, persistent effort by an internal network to operate outside the scrutiny of the future king. The financial trail, the suppressed warnings, the unrecorded meetings, and the hidden communications with external PR strategists were all documented within this single file. William and Catherine had not acted out of personal anger. They had used the formal mechanisms of palace administration to construct an impenetrable wall around the future of the monarchy. The final revelation contained within the report was the most explosive detail of all. The document revealed that the superyacht episode was not an isolated breach or a sudden lapse in judgment by Camilla's household. It was the visible symptom of a long-standing, parallel network that had been covertly funneling information out of the palace for years. The intermediaries involved in arranging the yacht trip had allegedly been in direct communication with private commercial entities seeking advance knowledge of royal heritage projects, property acquisitions, and official patronage shifts. The yacht controversy had not caused the fallout, it had simply provided the concrete evidence William needed to prove that the system surrounding his stepmother could no longer be trusted near the seat of power. Charles chose the survival of the crown over the comfort of his home. He signed off on the structural recommendations, quietly accepting that while his wife would remain beside him at public ceremonies, her access to the private heart of Windsor was gone forever. Catherine ensured that the execution of the new protocols was flawless. There were no emotional press conferences, no leaked statements of triumph, and no dramatic palace dismissals. Instead, the daily operations of Windsor Castle simply adapted to the new reality. Catherine assumed oversight of the private estate functions, while William's office took total control of the security vetting processes. The public continued to see the royal family carrying out their duties, completely unaware that the private balance of power had shifted permanently. Camilla retained her title, her security detail, and her official duties, but the inner sanctuary of the monarchy had been locked against her. If you are sitting there right now, watching this story conclude and choosing not to take action, ask yourself what that reveals about your own character. Millions of people look away when they see corruption and manipulation unfolding right in front of them, convincing themselves that it is not their problem. If you refuse to be one of those silent bystanders, if you actually value truth, justice, and holding the powerful accountable, hit that subscribe button immediately. Walking away without subscribing means you are choosing to accept the lies, and you know deep down that staying silent makes you complicit in the cover-up. The question that remains is not whether Camilla will ever regain her standing at Windsor, but how much longer the public narrative can hold. The yacht was never just a vessel on the Mediterranean, it was the catalyst that forced William and Catherine to seize control of the crown's future before it could be compromised from within. They demonstrated that the institution will always protect itself, even if it means severing the deepest personal bonds inside the royal family. The quiet power shift at Windsor is complete, but the hidden war inside the palace walls is far from over. While William and Catherine were finalizing the permanent restrictions against Camilla, an even darker secret was uncovered in the private archives at Sandringham. Tucked inside an unmarked vault, a forgotten audio tape recorded during a late-night telephone call exposes the exact moment Charles was warned about Camilla's secret meetings with the yacht owner back in 2019. The contents of that recording prove that the king knew far more than he ever admitted to his son, setting the stage for an explosive confrontation that threatens to split the royal household wide open. Subscribe right now so you do not miss a single second of our next breakdown, because when that audio transcript is revealed, nothing in the royal family will ever be the same again.